we're going to be doing things a little bit more out there for anyone who was involved in Annabelle's tasting yesterday. What we've gone for is some of those slightly more esoteric styles that you wouldn't necessarily think, oh yeah, that's a bit of me, when you go to the bar. So the first beer that we've actually gone for is from Bad Seed. So they're based over in Malton. It's Chris and James at Bad Seed, who are fantastic brewers. They've been over there since 2013, and the beer that we're going to be trying is this. So we've got the wonderful Slocken, which I always think sounds like a Scandinavian word, but apparently it's an old English word meaning thirst quenching. So, you can see, I've already poured myself a little bit. But this is one of those really, really nice, easy drinking, kind of your alternative to a lager style beers. It's actually used for second breakfast in Germany, which is, I think it's Reichsgebot. No, Reichsgebot's Purity Law, which is Brotzeit. So this is the beer to drink with brunch. You know, we're all about encouraging people to drink at 11 o'clock in the morning at Women on Tap, apparently. So the reason why it's called a Weiss beer is initially comes from the fact that the wheat that's used to produce this beer creates this lovely kind of like off yellow, slightly whiter, slightly diluted colour, and it's that slightly murky shade. But Hefeweizen, the style of beer this one means yeast wheat. So it's essentially just those two ingredients thrown together to produce this fabulous little beer. Now, what I'm going to ask everybody to do is, if you take a little sniff, so whenever you're smelling a beer, you want to kind of open up those aromas. So give it a little swirl like a wine tasting. Give a little sniff. And now what I want you to do, so that you're not influenced by what I'm going to say, is just type in the chat box the first thing that you think you smell. I know what I get. Cool. So we've got Anthony in there with banana grass. Lots of banana coming through. So that particular note actually comes from esters. So esters in particular come from the fact that a lot of wheat beers, they're fermented warm, which is very unusual. So typically what you get is you move your beer to the cold store, and then that's where your fermentation takes place. So what you get here is these lovely fruity esters that come from that slightly hotter beer production style. Now, this is a much more mild Hefeweizen compared to some. What you find is that in a lot of the German Hefeweizens, they ferment it at a much higher temperature, which basically turns into this big kind of bubblegum, clove, super intense banana note. But I find that this is a much more approachable style, which is partly why I picked it for today. Because it's a good way to introduce you into your wheat beers. So, using your reaction key, who is enjoying this beer? Ooh. Got a few there. Awesome. It's one of my favorite styles of beer out there, and I think that it's one that often gets overwritten by the fact that lager is like almost our national drink. It's the most popular beer in the UK, which I don't think would come as a surprise to anyone really. So Hefeweizen's actually one of the oldest styles of beer in the world. It was originally, they found evidence of it being brewed in 1700 BC. So if you want like an old drink, like the proper classics, you've not really got anything on a Weiss beer. Interestingly enough, the first laws surrounding beer actually were also related to Weiss beer. And then there's been a lot of debate about whether or not it was even relevant back in the day, because whilst beer that we're associated with, that real ale style with like heaps and heaps of malt, was seen as liquid bread, the Weiss beers were seen as a useless drink that neither nourishes nor gives strength, but only encourages drunkenness, which I'm happy to go along with that. That's a good point from Eileen. I've just seen pop up in the chat that there's not much hop character in there. That's because the predominant flavour is just the basis. This is just how it's made. It's a very pure style of beer. So it's one of the only ones that breaks from the German purity law, Reichsgebot, which was that you couldn't have anything aside from water, hops, and malt. But it still sticks to that very minimalist, very well-engineered style of beer. So, does anyone have anything that they'd like to say about this beer? Does anyone want to clap and say anything? Tony, I can see you're enjoying it. Oh,
it's delicious. It's very light.
It's such a, you can see why people want to drink it for brunch. Yeah.
Good idea.
I mean, when we were talking about pairings, obviously I did say that it goes with pretzels. That's kind of the classic German pairing. You get like a salty pretzel with this, and that salt kind of counteracts that clove characteristic. But it does also work with things like fish and chips. That kind of greasiness would of the fish would be counteracted with this fresh, light style of beer. Alternatively, this beer was actually brewed as part of a collaboration with the Black Swan in Oldstead with Tommy Banks, who's, I think, if anybody's been watching Great British Menu, you'll have seen a lot of him recently. But it was made to go with his venison dish. So it goes with that really rich, delicious style of meat. It's an interesting one because it can kind of cling to whatever flavours you present it with. That's what is so interesting about wheat beer when it comes to pairing. It's fab. Now then, the next beer that we were going to try, again, I know that this is going to challenge a few people in the room, is the Katie Berry. Now, obviously, no need to rush. If you do want to pop a glass to one side and come back to it, that's completely fine. The only one that would maybe experience the most change would be the third one, but I'll get onto that in a little bit. So, the next beer we've got is Katie Berry. Now, I'm a sucker for a sour, so I'm incredibly biased when it comes to my opinion on this beer. But what I'm hoping you'll find is that it's a much more approachable style of sour compared to some of your Gurzes or your Lambics. That's because this is a very, very modern example of a sour beer. So, yeah. I mean, it almost looks like it could be a mix between a health smoothie, some sort of Vimto-esque drink, but I always feel like when it comes to sour beers, there's something really fabulous about like having that bright, distinct colour to them. Now, I know that we shouldn't, but we do all kind of smell and taste and see with our, and of course we see with our eyes, but we all kind of smell and taste with our eyes first of all. So what you find is that you'll probably pick up on these blackberry aromas that you expect to get from your blueberry pale ale. So you'll get lots of blueberry notes, lots of blackcurrant notes, lots of those kind of deep forest fruit flavours coming through. Now, the reason I said it's a slightly more approachable style is because this is a pastry sour. So essentially what that means is they've thrown a load of oat in there to kind of smooth out, to kind of soften the body. It also is why it's got a lot better head retention than what you'll find with a lot of sours. But it also has this lovely kind of creaminess to it. So similarly with the oats, you've also got some lactose in there. So that contributes to the sourness, which is lactobacillus. So there's this little bacteria that essentially converts all that lactic sugar into sourness. Now, into lactic acid, sorry. Now, I find that you really, really get that kind of pastry note on the nose, but on the palate, you just get this lush kind of black, like proper blueberry pastry style flavour. So what do people think? Ooh, I like that kaffir note. A lot fewer thumbs up I'm noticing, and I can see one very unhappy face. Katie, do you want to say anything about this beer? Wait, let me just unmute you. Oh. Rachel, are you able to unmute Katie?
This is not beer.
No, it's a very specific type of beer. But I think if you're wanting something that's a bit more hoppy, a little bit more malty, that kind of more traditional style, then this isn't for you. What I always say though is that if you're traditionally a cider drinker, this is a really good beer to kind of ease you in.
Yeah, this is very cider-like, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's got much more of a body though than cider. So that's what I always find the main differences between cider and a well-made lactic sour. You've got this lovely kind of almost creamy, silky body to it that you wouldn't get typically. You usually get a much more zippy, zesty note from your ciders or from your lambics. I'm interested to know, is there anybody else that has this surprised anybody? Or does anybody just have anything to say? If you do, just pop your little clap sound. Oh, Alana. Quite a lot. I've just seen a question from Alana on the chat saying, do sours often use lactobacillus? And a few of them do. They will usually say so, but not necessarily. There's a few different bacteria that you can use to create that sour aroma, but lactic tends to be used a lot more in modern brewing. So like people like Brew York. Josh, I thought you clapped. Do you want to say something? Oh, we're just getting you up.
Yeah, cool. I was just going to say, I feel like it seems to be dividing people in the sense it's almost not sour enough, or it's not sort of soft enough. It seems to stick quite nicely, quite in the middle. But I think that's what I like so much about it. I think, like you were saying about the oats and stuff, it really is quite smooth, but you still get to pick out all of the really fruity flavors as well. I think I just put on the chat that you should get it over some ice in the sun. It'd be absolutely stunning.
Or pour it over ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. That was all.
I mean, I did say that it would go really well with things like a cheesecake.
Yeah.
So if you were running a little bit short on a coulis, then who's to say? Who's to judge?
Exactly.
So, moving on from this beer, as I say, no need to rush through anything unless anybody's got any particular questions that this beer's raised that they'd like to chime in on. Looks like we're good to go. So the next beer is one that I'm particularly excited about. And this is the one that if there was one beer that you want to drink quickly, it'll be this one. And for a reason that I'll explain in a little bit. So we've got the Double Dry Hops Transmission from North Brew. Now, I'm not sure what witchcraft we used to get hold of this because it seemed to disappear from every single retailer within about 10 minutes. I was actually chatting to the guys at North Bar today, and initially it was supposed to be a surprise for Hop City because it was so popular at their event last year. Then they launched it and everybody went nuts because it's an incredible, incredible beer. So with this, you should instantly get a big hit of hops. I've done a terrible job of pouring at that. that because I tried to smell it at the same time. But when you're pouring something like this, you just get this initial hit, like even before you stick your nose in to smell it, because the hops in a double dry hopped IPA will just be so punchy, will be so intense. You'll get this big kind of tropical hit, a little bit of a kind of piney note, as well as like some lovely citra, grapefruit, all sorts of loveliness. So what they've done with this is they've taken their transmission recipe, which is already a fantastic, fantastic beer, and essentially just doubled up on the citra, doubled up on the Chinook, doubled up on the Denali, and doubled up on the Mosaic, which basically just gives you an absolute hop explosion. What hopefully, I'm just kind of reveling in the smell from it at first, because it is stunning. One thing I will say is that if you're finding it's either smelling a little bit intense, it's smelling a little bit one note, like you're kind of starting to lose it a little bit, say either smell the back of your hand, which if you were at the tasting yesterday, you'll know it's a very good way to combat nose blindness. Or try smelling it from different points away from your nose, like, which sounds ridiculous, but I always do. There's a few different techniques. I do like a little swing by tasting, so nosing even. So then you kind of get these secondary characteristics. Like, I find that the grapefruit comes out so much more when you do that. Whereas if I do that, I get pine. Oh, crispy strips from Andy. Yeah, you kind of get like big, intense pine notes coming through initially, which are gorgeous, but like there's so much more in this beer. So it's such a good beer. It's just such a good beer. So you've got this lovely, almost kind of sweet pineapple note, a little bit kind of grapefruity kind of mango notes coming through on there. But what I'm hoping you'll notice is that there's not too much bitterness. So that's kind of the wonder of dry hopping, is that what you get is you get all of those lovely aromatics, but without that bitter note that you can typically get in your IPAs. So this is a really pure example of double the flavour, but without having to up the ABV, up the IBUs. It's like a stunning, stunning beer. Now, as I say, if you're going to drink one of the beers quickly, I would recommend this one, just because I'm sure that many of you in the craft, if you've been in the craft beer scene, will have heard the phrase hops fade fast. And so whilst this is a stunning beer, you won't get those intense aromatics in the same way if you let this just sit for a little while, for a little bit longer. Whereas with the sour, with the Slocken, I've had one of those open over an hour, like shamefully before, but like those really crisp wheat notes don't fade in the same way that hops would. So thumbs up for this one. Yep. Oh, good. I'm so glad you're enjoying it. I was really chuffed just to be able to get hold of it and to show it. Does anybody have anything that they want to say about this beer? Have they tried the transmission before, the standard transmission? And how does this compare? If you do like a little clapping emoji. No? Oh, Simon Baptiste or Anthony?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of strong IPAs, to be honest. It's tasty, it's really good, but the extra strength, I don't need it personally.
It's the same ABV.
Really?
So it's
well, the other one I find is smoother personally,
okay.
But it's good. I mean, it is tasty. It wouldn't be a go-to for me though. It's just a bit strong for me, but maybe that's just me. And then the sour, which I think really isn't me at all, is slowly growing on me.
Yeah.
So, but the Slocken, I need lots of this in my life.
I'll see what I can do.
Please.
One thing I will say is that when it comes to tasting beers, when you're trying them in such a condensed period like this, is don't trust your first taste. Like I always say, like what you say is right, like whatever you're tasting is what you're tasting. But when it comes to something like this, where you're trying everything in such a condensed period, your taste buds almost go into complete meltdown when you're trying so many things so quickly. So what you could almost do with doing is taking like 3 little sips just so you can acclimatize your taste buds. And then eventually it should just go, oh yeah, this tastes all right. So never trust that first taste, but like I totally appreciate that not every beer is for everyone. So, is everybody ready to get into the scary stuff? Now, as I say, I apologise to anybody who was wanting a nice, quiet Thursday night in. Truly was not intentional, but, you know, when in lockdown. So what we've got, first of all, is one of my favourite sour beers from 2 genuinely brilliant breweries. Like, Bad Company have upped their game so much recently, and Wild Child are just absolute kings of stouts at the minute. So this is their Tectonic Imperial Stout. So what you'll notice, first of all, is this is a very different colour to anything that you've seen so far. But what is interesting about it is that it's probably not as dark as things like your Guinness that you've had. You can see, if you hold it up to a light source, you can see there's almost a slightly amber hue to it. And then if you give it a sniff, this is a very unadulterated style of stout. So whilst you've got a lot of people going in with like the kind of those lactic styles of stout where you've got like this big milky undertone, this beer draws a lot of its sweetness from cinder toffee. So what they did is they threw some cinder toffee into the boil, and or at least as much as they could without destroying their kit, and then produced this beautiful beer. So I think it's just lush. So what's everybody thinking? What's the first tasting note that you get from this? And if someone says cinder toffee, I'll genuinely be surprised.
It's really, really strong.
Yeah.
Is this going to be under the table in an hour or so?
It's got a kick to it. It's got a kick to it. What I will say about these last two is that because they're a higher ABV and because alcohol is a natural preservative, like you can just leave them in the fridge and like they won't end up tasting hideous tomorrow. Like that you will still get a lot of those kind of chocolatey, malty, rich aromas. What I particularly like about this beer is this lovely kind of smoky undertone that you get from that cinder toffee that I personally really enjoy. And I find that even though it's a high ABV, it's still surprisingly drinkable. Not that you'd want to be chugging it, but also. One thing I will say is kind of picture this on something like Christmas Day. I know that it's on a beautiful day like today when you're looking out in the garden, it's not probably the first thing that comes to mind. But imagine this with like Christmas pudding or with ice cream or something along those lines. It'll just work really, really nicely at bringing out those kind of raisined notes, those baked notes. Alternatively, I think I put this on the tasting sheet. Blue cheese works really, really nicely. Or if you wanted something else to counteract that sweetness and you were wanting something a little bit more bougie, oysters are a really, really good shout. There's a reason why oyster stouts are so popular. So let's have a show of thumbs. lots of fans of this one. Oh, I'm seeing something from Lucy Thompson on the chat. I'm not sure where you are. With Imperial Stout, some are very smooth like this one, and some are just overwhelmed by the alcohol flavour. I mean, this one isn't barrel aged in particular, but I think it's partly down to just the brewing and how well integrated the beer is, to do with the malt content as well. Like, there's a lot of things that can make the alcohol more noticeable. I think that a really good way to get around that is with lactose or with barrel aging. It kind of smooths out all those rough edges that you sometimes get with alcohol. But aside from that, it tends to just be down to individuals brewing and also how much they want the alcohol to be noticeable. So, for example, the next one, I think you might notice a little bit more of a kick to, so I'm really sorry if you found this one a little bit stronger. Yeah, actually, I've just spotted in the chat, Gillian, you've said that this is a bit more like Belgian beers, and I have to agree. I think that it's got a similar sort of profile in that lovely sort of sweet undertone. Now, let's get on to the monster, quite literally. And I'm not sure whether Impending Sense of Doom is foreshadowing for tonight, but let's hope not. So, this is the only beer that isn't directly local. So this is from Torside, which is over Manchester Way. They are based in in Derbyshire, in New Mills. And that might have been nowhere near Manchester, but my geography is horrendous. So let's pretend that that didn't happen. So with this beer, first of all, let's do a little show of hands. Has anybody tried a barley wine before? So I can see a few of the usual suspects raising their hands. But for those who haven't, you're in for a bit of a treat. Now, Torside are probably, down at the shop, one of our favourite brewers out there at the minute. They're completely bonkers, but they've got this, they kind of show no fear when it comes to brewing. So with this particular beer, what they did was they brewed the Monsters part of this, which is the one we're drinking, next to a lower ABV red IPA called Red Right Hand. So then what they did was they took the Red Right Hand, threw it on some peat, and just thought, let's see what can happen. Now, if you don't like peated whiskey, I will say this probably won't be for you. And there's some very interesting notes coming through on this one. Medicine, rubber bands, I can see that. But if you think about like Young Isla whiskey, it's got a very similar kind of almost petrolic kind of that sort of note coming through, that big smoky flavour. So, and what you should hopefully find when you try it is that the nose will be deceiving. Now, I personally really like this style of beer. It's got this lush kind of smoky, tarry bonfire night style. If you do want to try something with it that you might have in your house, a slice of apple might work really nicely, just to kind of counteract with like that zesty kind of acidity, that crispness, to counteract that smoky, quite high alcohol character. I think Now, who wants to say anything about this beer? I'm seeing a few comments in the chat. Does anyone dare brave the coming off mute? Rachel, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just think that these sort of beers are really interesting in terms of like food pairing beers. Like they're not something that you would go out and drink like a couple of pints of, but they are really interesting as a sharer with maybe some specific like flavours of cheeses or whatever it is. I find that flavour complexity really interesting. It's a different view on beer, isn't it? And what it is like, because if you think of this as I wouldn't go to the pub and have 2 pints of that. Well, no, of course you wouldn't, because it's not meant for that really. But the flavour in it is so rich and has loads of potential.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think there are quite a few beers out there that are brewed. They're not necessarily brewed to be sat and have a pint of at a pub. Like this one, for example, I would love to have it at a barbecue. Like imagine it with like a brisket where you've got that really rich, really intense meaty character coming through, or something like a kind of older blue cheese. I know that I said aged cheddar would work really, really well because you've got that almost slightly sweet note with something like that. And that really intense dairy character, I think would work really, really nicely. Now, as I say, this is one that you can sit and leave for a day just because the ABV is so strong. Like those peaty characters might kind of start to drift off a little bit, but you should still be getting some of those sweeter barley wine notes coming through. So if you did want to pop the cap back on it and try it again tomorrow, maybe with some snacks, if anybody went for the pretzels on the tasting sheet, then even that little salty note, I think would work really, really nicely. Now, and again, this is one that I think that your taste buds almost need to get used to, because you've got this quite intense alcohol hit that your body will automatically go, oh my God, what the heck have you done to me? First of all, you give me this sweet alcohol note, and now you've got this really boozy, peaty, goodness knows what style of beer. I think it's one that I hope would grow on people, and I really enjoy it. So, what are people saying? Oh yeah, Andy's just said, so will it taste different in 2023? This is 100% a beer that you could age. 100%. I reckon those peaty notes, in a similar way with like peated whiskies, as they age, what you get is that it kind of drifts from that sort of petrolic note, that kind of slightly rubbery aroma, to like that more smooth campfire note that is more classically associated with like your like Portuguese, your I've forgotten, your Ardbegs, things like that. So what you should find is that the peat notes soften up, move into those latter characteristics. Rubber is kind of the equivalent of tannins. You find it in a similar way in like a reverse in Riesling, where like you get a similar note as it gets older, but what you find with a lot of these really, really intense, very odd, quite sharp characteristics is that with a bit of aging, they all kind of soften up or start to meld a little bit better. So that sweet note, that smoky note, that alcohol note, like I noticed that I can feel it right in my chest, that alcohol burn, but that should almost dissipate to a point that it's all kind of feels connected. It feels like this beer is a little bit, it feels like it could do with maybe like 6 months, but it's still a fantastic example of just some fun brewing. So, what is everyone thinking? Does anyone want to clap and say something? Josh, are you wanting to say something? Oh, and Josh and Hannah. So I'm not sure who we're going to get to first.
There you go, Shane. Is it? Yeah.
One hand you're on.
I was just going to pick up on what Rachel was saying about having it with a meal and having it with food. I think what we've learned through you guys at Woman on Tap is how much pairing it with things can change the flavours of what's coming through in the beer. And I think this would be amazing, as you say, with some strong cheeses, or be really interested to try it with some different strong flavours to see what ways it changes the flavours in the beer. It is really overpowering at first, but it's growing on me a lot. It's really smoky, and yeah, I really like it. And I'm not a dark beer, barley wine kind of drinker, so.
Hannah, you keep disappearing. It's amazing.
But I guess it goes with the name.
Is that the beer that's doing that? That's magic.
Yeah. Like floating head, isn't it? It's weird.
Now, I'm not sure who it is that's. I'm assuming the person under Nichola Yallop is not Nichola, but I can see in your comments that you said that you just gone and got yourself some cheese to try with it. Do you mind if we unmute you so you can say what you think?
I can unmute myself, that's all right. I tried it with 85% chocolate and it was still foul, but with strong cheddar, it was actually not bad at all. Kind of properly mixed together, it's not bad. Good. I did not like it on its own one bit, though, I have to say.
Yeah, I was chatting to the guys from the brewery this morning, and I was just like, it's going to divide the room. And he was just like, yeah, that's fine. We were expecting it to. So, like, it is one of those beers that you will either absolutely get behind. Like, I was brought up on peaty whiskey, so this is properly my sort of flavour. But I really enjoy it. Josh, sorry, I know you wanted to say something too. If we can unmute Josh.
Hello.
Hello.
Firstly, I think Leslie might have something to say about the phrase "brought up on peaty whiskey."
It was in utero, Mum.
I was simply going to say it's absolutely stunning, and I was going to ask if you got any more bottles in the shop, just individually.
I think we might have two.
Interesting.
Genuinely, we might only have two left.
Yeah, I've basically poured it all straight into my glass, and I think I want to age some.
Oh, yeah.
That was literally it. It's so good now, and I agree with you that it could do with at least a few more months. There's so much going on. It's just delicious.
It was only released relatively recently, so it's you've almost still got some of like that hop acidity coming through, which I think makes the alcohol just almost a little bit too intense. And then when you've got that quite young smoky note coming through as well, it makes it it kind of makes your tongue go, what the heck are you doing? Oh, just spotted someone's got a Torside War Russell, and I am incredibly jealous because that is a stunning, stunning beer. So I think we're going to open it up to the floor. Obviously, I'm hoping that you've not finished all of the beers in the time that it's taken us to get through them. But, I mean, if you have done, this might make for a very fun Q&A. But does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask, either in the chat or if you want to do like a little wave? It can be about like any of the beers that we tried earlier on, any of the beers that we're trying now. Andy and Fiona?
So Imperial Stout and Imperial Porter, and they've now started introducing double Imperials. What makes the definition of the Imperial and what makes the definition of the double Imperial?
Oh God, that's testing. So Imperial, I always viewed as between 8 to 12, and then Russian Imperial is like 10% plus. Russian Imperial is pretty similar to your double Imperial. It seems like it's a very new phrase. Like what you find in the craft beer world is that there's a lot of phrases that it's quite difficult to define them, just because a lot of them spring up out of nowhere, and you're like, well, that sounds like it's something that already exists. But
I've got 3 cans of barrel-aged fierce beer at 12.5% Imperial, which is just unbelievable. But they only call that Imperial, whereas I think some people are joining the bandwagon of double Imperial of that 12.5% level.
Yeah, like, I mean, if there was a point when you could call it a double Imperial, I would say 12% is probably about that. But I think it's a lot of the time brewer discretion. Like similarly with double IPAs, I think that for a lot of people, they view double IPA as like 6. Some people view it as like 6%. Some people view it as 8. Some people view it as 12. Like it's.
So there's no definition.
Hmm?
There's no definition then. You know, anyone can call anything.
Technically, I don't. Not as far as I've ever found.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Anybody else? I'm just looking in the. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Let's have a look through here. Defining a barley wine style. Now, barley wine's a tricky one because there's a few different types. So you've got an American barley wine, and then you've got an English barley wine. I'm not even sure if Torside have actually said whether theirs is more of an English style or a American style. Most people tend to go more towards the American style nowadays, just because that was the influence of Sierra Nevada. They did a beer a while ago called Bigfoot, which kind of brought barley wine back into public opinion. So that might be me just being a bit too big on their style. What essentially makes a barley wine is like that high malt content, the high ABV, but without those darker malts that would bring it into that stout territory. One other thing is that barley wines, the ABV is like a massive part of it. So you've got barley wines that go from about 9% to like 14%. Like they're an absolutely bonkers beer. And I think kind of within those parameters, it's almost an anything goes kind of attitude. You want that like slightly sweeter note coming through, but you still want to maintain that lightness to it. Any other questions? Katie?
Why is it called barley wine?
I've not got a clue. I've been trying to find that for so long.
Very misleading.
Yeah, I think it's to do with the ABV and the fact that it's more akin to wine than to beer. But it's one of those things that I think is so drenched in myth now that I've not been able to find it. I know we've got Sarah on the chat who might be able to shed a little bit of light, but 'cause again, she's got amazing beer knowledge. But yeah, that's what I thought. So it's also to do with the glassware that you drink it in. So because it was typically drunk in a chalice, so kind of think like, you know, the Chimay glasses where you've got that angular goblet chalice style glass. That was what you would typically drink your barley wines in. Like Anthony, nailing it with the presentation. Now, let's do like a little roll call. I'm going to do go through all of the beers and see what everyone's favourites were. So whose favourite was the Slocken? If you do like a little thumbs up. Got Malcolm, Nicola, Tiffany, Anthony, Mark, a few of you on that one. To be honest, I feel like that means there's another one that's competing. Ah, good choices. Anyone's favourite the Brew York? Leslie, Katie, Isabel, awesome. The DDH transmission, I know John, that was one of yours. Katie, Simon, Andy, Gillian, oh, really popular. The Tectonic, the Impy Stout. Yeah, I find that that's like everything that I want in like a proper Imperial Stout. And finally, did anybody find they were converted to the monsters? Tiffany, Jem, Josh, Rachel, and Ryan there with that one. Oh, awesome. So glad you liked them. So I kind of wanted to go for some weirder beer styles that you wouldn't necessarily think you'd pick at a pub, because I know that I even find it easy enough to just go, oh, I want that IPA that's about 6.5%, get half of that and I'm sorted. But I thought it'd be a nice way to introduce people to some slightly different styles of beer, some beers that you perhaps wouldn't necessarily go to, but I thought I'd force you into trying anyway. So is there anything that anybody wants to add as a final note? We'll unmute you if you'd like. Do just like a little clap or anything. Oh, Eileen, we'll just get you unmuted. One sec. Eileen. There we go.
Just to say what brilliant, slightly off the wall selection of beers. Nothing much very safe or predictable there. It's great. 3 of us here sharing. Luckily, there's enough kind of diversity of which the favourites are, but we've all got a bit left to drink. We're not all fighting. Although I think the household favourite was the transmission. But I'm sitting here and actually the bad boy's really growing on me. So
it's good beer.
But then I like peachy whiskey. So, and it's, I think once you get past the nose, which is actually quite almost off-putting, and you start drinking it, it's starting to slip down rather easily.
It's one of those days.
I'm sure your mum and I have got grave doubts about our choir practice tonight.
I mean, I hear that like a little bit of alcohol like loosens the vocal cords. It'll be grand. I'm not sure that Anthony and Andy, I think, also wanted to say something. But thank you, Eileen.
I'm trying to mute myself.
I just say thank you, Nicola. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
I absolutely hate the barley wine now. I'm sorry. I just nah. But the more of this that you can get me, the better. This Slocken is fantastic.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I think it's become part of their core range. I know that initially it was a special, but I think that it's become part of their core range.
The only place online I can buy it is Trembling Madness, which is great because that's around the office, corner from the office. Oh, but I can't go to the office. So I've just worked out they've got a quantity thing and I can work out how much they've got in stock and I can order at least 20, it seems. So if you can get it, please do.
You should be able to. And Fiona and Andy?
I think it's been brilliant. I think that it shows the benefit that if you go to a pub, that these pubs who do thirds allows you to taste lots of different things. Whereas, it's really easy to go to a pub and go, I'll have a pint of something And the pubs which aren't doing the thirds, I think they're missing out there's so much fantastic sort of beer around at the moment that giving that option of thirds, and I know that it's not always easy to give a tasting of really expensive beer, but I just think that that's the change which is going on in the pubs at the moment. And I think doing a tasting session like this gives people encouragement to try something new. So I think it's been brilliant, Nicola. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I like the sound. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I hope that you've all enjoyed this evening. I hope that you've tried something that's maybe challenged you a little bit, found something that you really liked, found something that you've maybe gone, oh my God, I am never going to try anything like that in a pub ever again. But I'm hoping that it's basically just giving you the chance to try something a bit different and like maybe learn a little bit more about the styles behind it, maybe learn a little bit more about what constitutes those flavours. I feel like a few of you will be going out and trying more wheat beer from now on, and a few of you might be going for some of the more lactic sours. But yeah, thank you very much, and I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you'll be getting involved with some more of the events with Women on Tap later in the week. But I'll pass you back to Rachel, who
Rachel is now struggling to unmute herself, having had those last two beers. Thank you so much, Nicola. That was really good. Like I've loved some of those beers, and we've got a table full of them to finish. So who knows where the night's going to end? Well, it's going to end in the house, isn't it? But maybe in a different room we might go. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming on board. And I think that for us as well, this lockdown, for when you're trying to find some kind of positives from it, we've certainly branched out and tried some different stuff that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. So while we're desperately looking for some positives here, that's definitely one of them. And I've had some cracking beers over these last few weeks, just taking a punt on stuff. So I'd encourage everyone else to do that as well. But thank you so much for coming along. Nicola is on Twitter if anybody has any questions. If you have thank you, Hannah, for the reminder, who keeps disappearing still into the background. We are raising money for Refuge through the festival. With all the events are free. Obviously, some of you will have bought beer packs and stuff, but the festival events themselves are completely free. A lot of people donate in time for nothing. And we're looking to raise at least £1,000 for Refuge. We've got a Just Giving page, which I'll send round everybody. If you are able, we'd love you to support that. It would be great just to do some good and have a lot of fun along the way. So we'll send that around. And thank you for bringing your dogs as well, because that's good. And we've got lots of events until Sunday, so have a look on womenontap.co.uk. And thank you again for Nicola and all your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
finishing your crazy beers.
Enjoy the rest of the evening. I hope that or at least we don't have to go anywhere with the strength. So have a lovely evening, and thank you so much to everybody who did buy the packs. I think we've raised about £100 through Aiken Humphris for Refuge via that. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you later, everybody. Have a good evening.
See you later, everybody. Have a good night.